Sky, proud partner and supporter of the Republic of Ireland women's national football team.
This is News Talk.
All right, you're welcome back to the football show. Nathan with you this evening. So confirmation today that Richard Arnold will become the new chief executive of Manchester United on February 1st, with Ed Woodward to leave his role. Arnold has been with the club for 14 years, most recently in the role of group managing director since 2013. Woodward's departure as executive vice chairman has been in the pipeline really since the collapse of the Super League project in the middle of last year. To chat about this and what it really means for Manchester United, I'm joined by LAURIE Whitwell of The Athletic. Good evening, LAURIE.
Hi Nathan, you okay?
I'm alright. So this really just rubber stamps, I guess, what everybody knew was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. Is there more of a finality, though, to Ed Woodward's departure than people were expecting? That actually, rather than hanging around over the next couple of years as a sort of consultant, on the 1st of February, Ed Woodward will have no more of a role with Manchester United?
Yeah, it is a little bit more final than I think people predicted, because there was some rumours, genuine, substance to them, that he might actually take on a consultancy role once, he kind of stepped away from being the day-to-day, I guess, executive vice chairman of Manchester United. The idea being that, in corporate structures that happens a lot, where people departing have this kind of, basis where they can be called upon and perhaps give their insight and experience to certain tasks. But no, yeah, he's going to be stepping away properly from the club in the summer. He's going to still be on the football board up until that point, although the football board doesn't really have an awful lot of agency. It doesn't meet all that often, so he effectively is stepping away. He'll be on the end of the phone if anyone needs him. Richard Arnold obviously is a close friend of his from working with him throughout Manchester United, and even before that they first met at PricewaterhouseCoopers back in the early 90s. So clearly he'll be available if required, but yeah, it is more of a clean break than I think was anticipated.
It would have been hard for Ed Woodward to leave on a high, considering the highs have been few and far between in his 8 years in the role, but he couldn't have imagined he'd be leaving at such a low point for Manchester United in so many ways. 22 points behind Manchester City, once again outside the top four in the Premier League, and at the moment, day after day, week after week, leaks out of the dressing room, players unhappy, the squad, it seems, in just complete mutiny at the moment. It's a complete mess at Manchester United at the moment.
It does feel that way. I mean, he would probably argue that actually that would be over-egging it, that actually the discord in the dressing room isn't as severe as perhaps has been made out. I've certainly heard myself that there is disgruntlement from the players to perhaps the coaching sessions, from the manager to the players, even perhaps the manager within the structure that he's working in. It's difficult to exactly ascertain exactly what the truth of that is. People have different opinions. One player might be okay with things, another might be absolutely livid, but at the same time, players on the fringes for sure. The squad is too big, and this is one of the things you can perhaps label Ed Woodward as a failure on his behalf, not being able to manage the squad properly. You've got 29 sort of senior players really there. Ranić, I think, had 26 in one coaching session, so he's leaving out a third each time from the whole squad entirely, let alone the starting 11. So there's going to be fringe players that are disaffected. You've got Anthony Martial and Jesse Lingard as two examples that kind of are seeing their futures elsewhere. That kind of atmosphere kind of permeates amongst the squad. So yeah, it's a difficult sort of situation right now at Carrington. Certainly, if you speak to Ed Woodward, he would have loved to be doing this, I think, at the start of the season when he's just signed Cristiano Ronaldo, Rafael Varane's been in the building, and Jadon Sancho, and the picture was looking a lot rosy. United top of the table, sort of 4 wins out of 5 to begin the season. But I think really this is the true reflection of the kind of structure that Ed Woodward has overseen, because there is too much waste in terms of the money they've spent, £1 billion more than when he announced his resignation last April. That was something that he himself brought up without sort of acknowledging that actually that money probably hasn't been very well spent for a large part when you look at what Manchester City have been able to produce with a similar kind of spend. So yeah, I think it's a sort of pretty apt way for him really to depart, because they haven't been close to challenging for the title. As you said, 22 points off top. That's been about the average in terms of since Ferguson left. That United have been behind the leaders, the title winners. So that's about right, really. And yeah, it's now on Richard Arnold as the chief executive to, I guess, try and alter that trend. He's going to give more autonomy to the football people to make football decisions, which is something that I think you can certainly point the finger at Ed Woodward for doing, getting too involved in an aspect of the club that he didn't really know an awful lot about, certainly at the beginning.
Play devil's advocate for a minute, and if you're sitting down with Ed Woodward next summer and he's putting his CV together and he's probably going to leave off the litany of failures, what is he going to put in as the positives, the success stories of the last 8 years at Manchester United?
He will certainly put forward the fact that he has overseen the commercial growth of Manchester United. I mean, okay, it's plateaued over the last few years. Maybe they've reached a saturation in terms of what a club the size of United can actually get from kind of sponsorships. But I think you have to say they've generated their own money. So he will, I think rightly say, look at Manchester City, look at Chelsea. They have funding from outside that comes in and has affected their sort of turnover and their balance sheet. I mean, Manchester United have to generate their own funds. The Glazer family take money out of the club rather than put money in. So the ownership structure is very different. And Ed Woodward has, astutely, I would say, with Richard Arnold, gone around the world and managed to get these partners and get money into the club through other means than, broadcast revenues and match day revenue. It might not be to everyone's taste, but I think he can certainly say to other businesses or other football organisations that might want to employ him, I have done this. And I think he would also, and I think you can give credit to the fact they haven't raised ticket prices for 10 years since he took charge. United's prices are pretty competitive, certainly when you look at some of the London clubs. The prices that they pay for season tickets is much larger.
You're not exactly getting the same experience at Old Trafford as you are even at an Arsenal or Tottenham in terms of the stadium, the modern sense of going to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium or even the Emirates. Like, Old Trafford's sort of fallen apart.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's been far overdue an uplift. The roof still does have leaky areas when it rains too much. United are now saying that they've got plans in place, that they're starting that process of actually improving the stadium, increasing the capacity. It's been far overdue. I would probably say that's down to Joel Glazer more than Ed Woodward, although he's obviously in the building. He could really have pushed for better improvements to be made. I take your point, certainly in terms of the experience, but it is Old Trafford. It's still got a bit of sort of nostalgic quality to it, and they've had big players there. I think the ticket prices, I think is a fair thing to say. Okay, you haven't raised them, but then again, if they'd raised them, there might have been uproar. So maybe it's the sort of faint praise, I suppose, that I'm giving them there. And I guess finally, just on the way that they handled the pandemic, they still paid full wages to staff. They didn't furlough them, and they also had sort of good record with giving out free meals to NHS staff members and the good work in the community where they could do. So I think that's probably fair enough.
All our football coverage is brought to you by Sky. Don't miss Liverpool against Shrewsbury in the FA Cup this Sunday. It's going to be live on Premier Sports. We're talking to Laurie Whitwell of The Athletic about Manchester United. In terms of what happens next and Richard Arnold and his role as chief executive and leaving it to the football men to a certain extent, I guess in modern football you can't completely leave it to the football men. In fact, the best clubs, whether it's Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City, get the mix perfectly right, because particularly in the case of Chelsea and Liverpool, it's not so much about the money they spend, it's the money that they bring in, that Liverpool can go and get huge money for a Dominic Solanke or Divock Origi, and you look at the conveyor belt of talent that comes through Chelsea, and players sign for Southampton for 12-15 million. You barely even knew they were a Chelsea player. There has to be a certain amount between John Murtagh and Richard Arnold of them working together to just change the way Manchester United are looked upon, I guess, by the rest of the football world.
Hugely. It's the biggest thing that Ed Woodward has failed to do: sell players at the right time, generate their own funds with that, and keep the squad fresh. And not only, it's got a kind of double-pronged approach. You're raising money and you're also keeping people on their toes, and you kind of keeping a tight squad where everyone feels they've got agency. I did a piece this morning on what is in Richard Arnold's in tray, and Chelsea sold players for £102 million last summer. And as you say, some of them you kind of thinking, oh right, I didn't realise he played for Chelsea, and they're getting like £18 million for him. 34 million for Tammy Abraham. United got 25 million for Dan James. That's a good little bit of business, but they need to do more of that. They've got Axel Tuanzebe out on loan, Andres Pereira, Tahith Chong. These are guys that have come through the academy. They should really be selling them, getting them, realising that they're not going to make it Man United, and getting good deals for them.
And the reason behind not selling, say, Axel Tuanzebe, is it a lack of confidence to make a decision that, well, maybe Axel Tuanzebe will come good and we don't want to be the team that let him go, and the embarrassment of that, instead of selling him now for 18-20 million?
I think so, yeah. I think there's, and that's why, because Ed Woodward would say he doesn't have, he accepts that he doesn't have, the football acumen of other people that have had that in their bones from when they were kids. He wouldn't want to get involved in that level of discussion, but he would look at the bottom line of things and think, well, actually, this player is worth this amount, on the balance sheet, and actually, in reality, it's not like that. Which is why you get these players signing new contracts to protect their value, when actually United should just cut their losses. And so hopefully you've got John Murtough there in place. I mean, he is, fairly fresh to that particular role. He's been a football administrator for a long time, but it's been in the academy system. So now this is the senior setup. Different contacts are required. Different kind of approach, I suppose, also. So he needs to get this right, pretty quickly with Richard Arnold. It is approach in tandem where you can't separate the football from the business. They're kind of interlinked, but certainly they have not. There's been too many occasions in the past where the business has overridden what the football decision should be, and hopefully between them they can get it right. And I think you're right. I think it's been a cautiousness on United's behalf as to not wanting to get rid of players that might actually do okay elsewhere, but also a kind of sense that actually that they're not that great at realising when to sell a player and when to keep them in the building.
In terms of what's happening on the pitch at the moment and around the first team, it feels a little bit insane. Every morning I pick up the newspapers and it's all leaks out of the Manchester United dressing room, and certain factions within the dressing room aren't happy with the way the club is going, and other factions aren't happy that certain players are guaranteed their place in the starting 11 regardless of performance. I think everybody expected with Ralph Rangnick that there would be, as always, the initial bounce, the initial honeymoon period. That really hasn't happened. Performances on the pitch have been as bad. That Wolves performances as bad. Maybe not in the scoreline as the end of the Solskjaer era, but performance-wise, it certainly felt that way. And even reading your article in The Athletic today, a sense from Rangnick that he hasn't been able to get the sort of control he wants so far. He's looking at, you said, as a big squad, too many players around the place, too many disappointed players all the time. It already feels like an impossible task for Ralph Rangnick, and already it feels we're past the conversation as to whether he'll stay on in the summer.
It does unfortunately feel that way, because that was the sort of thing that everyone thought, actually, he probably fancies this job long term. He's got that consultancy that could easily be tweaked into a permanent position. We saw it with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. He had an incredible run and got the job on a permanent basis, so it wasn't beyond the realms. It feels like that is a conversation for long in the future now. It doesn't feel like it's going that way. It feels like United will go and get a different permanent manager for the rest of the duration, unless Ralph Rangnick can turn this around. And it might sound sort of ridiculous to say that at this stage. It was one defeat, really, but I think it has been the manner of performances, and as you say, the fact that there's this sense of unease amongst the players, the coaching staff. I mean, that's probably been a crucial thing. Usually when a manager is sacked, his coaches go and it's a whole new team that gets brought in. And that's kind of the understandable thing. In United's case, it's slightly different, just because Kieran McKenna and Michael Carrick, I think they probably would have intended to keep them in the building. They would have liked to have them there as a kind of understanding of the full squad. And certainly Ralph Rangnick, as a manager who hasn't, sporting director manager, he's managed sort of 2 seasons in the last 10, probably would have lent on them quite a lot. So he's kind of had to assemble a team at fairly short notice, and they're learning about the Premier League as well. And that just creates a sort of sense of uncertainty, I suppose, with, if they're telling players to do certain drills, are they going to do it instantly and respect exactly the pedigree that the person telling them to do it, or are they going to slightly doubt that? And I think we're sort of seeing that there's those doubts that have crept in, and the results, what came first, the bad results and therefore the doubt, or the doubt and therefore the bad results. I think we'll see a bit more in the fullness of time. Rangnick, certainly this 4-day period before the Aston Villa FA Cup game on Monday night, is thinking that he can really drill the players. It's sort of fresh impetus, I think, for getting them back into a coordinated system. But I think he struggled. He came in with this idea of high pressing. We saw it for like half an hour against Crystal Palace, and it just hasn't really happened beyond that. And I think I get the sense that he's feeling like these players aren't equipped to do that, and I might have to change slightly exactly what I'm asking them to do.
Yeah, it does read as well that maybe the players feel that they're not equipped, that while obviously they're spending time in the training ground working on the high press, that they feel they should be spending more time actually when they're in possession of the ball, which is quite a big conflict considering Ralph Rangnick came in on the reputation of being the man who invented the gegenpress, and that was the entire reason bringing that more modern style of football into Manchester United. It's hard to figure out how in the space, as you say, of 4 days there can be some sort of a coming together.
Yeah, it's difficult. I don't know, which way it's going to go with selection and personnel. The Cristiano Ronaldo sort of dilemma, I suppose. He's clearly such a huge figure. He scored by far United's highest number of goals this season. But at the same time, it just doesn't. It can't possibly fit in with a high pressing style where he's running all over the place. He's done it in bits and starts. To be fair, he's sprinted to close down in moments, but it obviously needs a coordinated effort between all the different front players. And if there's a kind of a sense that one guy might not go, then from another player's point of view, he'd be thinking, well, should I go or not? Is it going to? Are we going to get passed around? Is it going to get picked apart? So yeah. Deep troubles in that sense from his point of view. Listen, maybe he'll go a bit more sort of defensive, compact, and play on the counter attack. That might be, that was obviously a strategy that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer used, kind of got criticised for, I suppose. But I think he saw these issues as well, and the squad just isn't quite. It's not balanced, and that's central midfield. You look at it for a technical midfielder that can keep hold of the ball. It's kind of what United are crying out for, really, and it hasn't happened for a number of seasons. And again, we go back to Ed Woodward. That is probably something where he that should have happened already, and you can probably land that at his door. Yeah,
it's going to rumble on and be interesting right the way through until the end of this season, no doubt. Laurie, great to talk to you as always. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Nathan.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky, proud partner and supporter of the Republic of Ireland women's national football team.
This is News Talk.